Hi, it's Chris with Implied Music. We've been looking at chromatic mediant modulation, slip modulation to create epic chord progressions and great harmonies. And the question has arisen, well, what about orchestrating something like that? Strings, horns, woodwinds, percussion, maybe synthetic textures as well. What's it sound like to use these chords with those textures? Well, let's play around with it today. Well, we're going to use some simple sketching orchestration tools, Albion, Neo, piano, miscellaneous percussion from Contact's VSL library to sort of mock up the impression of having a full orchestra. And, it's a painstaking process to orchestrate a chord progression or melody or piece. In fact, I sort of think the best arrangements and orchestrations arise not just from an understanding of individual instruments, but actually from the understanding of the individual players. When I think about something like Ellington's big band and how he wrote specifically to the people in his band, or even Bach's Brandenburg concertos, which were just kind of tried out in a coffee shop there in his home in Leipzig. Listen, I think that the best orchestrations arise from understanding and imagination. Now, we have tools at our disposal now that allow us to do that. And so I'm just using the simplest kind of approach, full sections as opposed to individual instruments. And ideally, I would go violin 1, violin 2, separate tracks for each, viola, cello, basses, something different for the winds like flute, oboe, clarinet. Every one of these winds gets its own track. In fact, maybe we have 2 clarinets, 2 flutes, bassoon, French horn, brass, trombone, it goes on and on, right? I've split it out super easily. Strings, winds, brass, and that's just the way Albion Neo works, and it's the way a lot of orchestration sketching tools work. Well, all that said, we should listen to some stuff, right? Here. So we've looked at a couple of sort of demonstration chord progressions, and we're going to use those today. But before we even look at the chord progressions and talk about what chromatic mediants are, listen to these sounds. We've got 2 very small sections of orchestration. That was it. Let's remind ourselves what chromatic mediant harmony is, and then look at how we used it in those orchestrations. Well, here you see the chord progression from the first example, and it's very simply, and you can see it visualized up above, C major, followed by E major, followed by A flat major. Now, there's no key signature anywhere that has any 2 of those chords in it. And so what we've got here is something that's kind of surprising. It's always going to delight and surprise the ear. And it's chromatic mediant modulation or movement. The roots move in thirds. They move in major thirds. So there are my roots right there. And I went from C to E to A flat. And very simple triads here. A root position, C triad, a second inversion E triad where the center voice, the E, remains the same, and the outer 2 voices just kind of tick up like that and down. Makes for great parsimonious chord motion. And then the G sharp changes its name to A flat when it got married to the A flat chord, and the E drops down and the B comes back up again. Listen, you can see how these individual voices move just by half steps, right? In these great voice leadings, we've got a really powerful sound. How does that translate to strings, winds, horns? Well, let's take a look at what I did. So here are the strings, and I've got sort of strings 1 and 2. And as you can see, there's a lot of voices there. It's, sort of 5 voices. But notice how each sort of section, each layer of the strings has its own identity. A low bass line, which functionally descends, a central part, which ascends with little steps, and then a high line also ascending and holding. Listen to these strings. Trying to create a feeling of swell, right? That swelling sort of heartfelt motion, and contrary motion with the bass descending helps. Now, let's add the brass to that. The brass is anchoring the bass. It just gives us a little more bottom end, and I didn't really need to double the top with the trumpets or anything like that. It's not quite that kind of sound. Now I'm going to put winds on top of that, and it's just for sparkle. I think it might have been a little bit hard to hear in context. Let's solo it. My last layer is percussion, just to sort of add, I don't know, fairy dust, basically. Some low impact bass drum and kind of beltry on the top, and that's about it. It's kind of all I felt I needed with this particular moment. Let's look at my second chord progression and how it's easily orchestrated. It's just intuitive orchestrations, not trying to make a big deal out of it. Just kind of, what would it be like if we did this? So here's my second chord progression, and it's a different kind of motion or modulation. I'm going from C, there's my root, and you can see C minor 7 at the top, to B major 9. Now, those notes have, weirdly, a few tones in common, and that's what I'm trying to take advantage of. The C minor 7 chord has, of course, an E flat and a B flat. And over here in the B chord, the note which was E flat is repurposed as D sharp, the third of B major. The note that was the minor third of C minor becomes the major third of B major. This is the essence of the slip change. Now, the B flat, which was the minor 7th, becomes A sharp, which is the major 7th of B. It makes for a really interesting sound. Some notes have to change, and so we get that harmonic shift. This is a very pianistic sound, the little trill in the middle between the D natural and the C sharp. It's so beautiful. It sounds satisfying on piano, but what would it be like to orchestrate it a bit? Let's listen. Well, again, you can see the chord progression up on the top, and these strings, which are just simple voicings, it's a lot like what you saw on the piano, are pizzicato. Just plucking, and you can hear a high string on the top. We'll get back to that in a moment. I love that propulsion. Okay, well, it was sort of a mistake to have that high string playing, but let's bring it in. I guess we should probably also bring in the high woodwind line as well, because what that is a little melody that pulls the two chords together. And, when you do something like this, it's a little bit tricky because each chord has its own scale associated with it. And what that means is as you progress through even a simple melody, you may have to make tiny changes to notes. It may not be able to be D. It might have to be C sharp or D sharp instead. So you can hear what happens in this high line. I've got it in thirds, strings, and then the wind line, the flute, really has the melody. Honestly, that was plenty satisfying for me, but let's add a couple more elements, the brass, the percussion. I think I want to play the secondary woodwind parts and the brass at the same time because it's doing something a little bit different. And I just want you to hear how it's working. I'm using essentially pulsing parts a lot in this, and the brass and the winds kind of work off each other. Listen to how it goes from eighth notes to eighth note triplets and swells and then recedes, especially in the winds. That goes very, very well with the pizzicato strings and supports that melody line. All right, let's bring everything back in. We'll bring back our strings and our beautiful woodwind line, add the percussion. And this is a fairly dense texture, but because of the lightness of the pizzicato strings, it doesn't feel terribly heavy. Orchestration's a very broad idea. And I think that it's hard to learn without practical hands-on experience, and also probably something that is good to read about. There are a couple of great books on orchestration. I think the one that really captured my attention was by Rimsky-Korsakov, the great orchestrator. There's a book by Fraser, which was used in school for the longest time when I was in school. And then there's the examples of the great symphonic composers and orchestrators. And some of them are easy to hear and really satisfying. I mean, think about the fun orchestrations of, say, Prokofiev's Peter and the Wolf, or Stravinsky's use of extreme registers for instruments to create kind of mysterious textures in something like The Rite of Spring. Orchestration's an art that goes along with composition, and frequently people are just orchestrators, right? They just take other composers' work and they make it sound better because of the way they arrange instruments. Well, don't hesitate to experiment. Play around. We've got tools now that allow us access to all kinds of instrumental timbres, right? And there are great teachers both on YouTube, books, videos. Hey, listen, I hope this has been useful. Like and subscribe and ding the bell. You'll be notified when I do my videos, and I'll see you next time.